If you're an HR professional who works hard to fill roles within your company, keep employees engaged, and build company culture, welcome to America Back to Work, where dreams only work if we do. We'll share wide-ranging issues surrounding pre-employment background screening, HR topics such as recruiting, hiring, labor trends, and company culture, as well as broader HR-influenced business topics such as customer experience, service level excellence, and protecting what matters through best practices in prevention, protection, and corporate security. America Back to Work is brought to you by S2 Verify. Here's your host, Arnette Heintze.
Welcome to America Back to Work, brought to you by S2 Verify, where our purpose is to help you hire with confidence and manage insider risk. I'm your host, Arnette Heintze. Thank you for joining. Today, our guest is Shane Spraggs. Shane is the CEO of Virtira, and he's the co-author of The Power of Remote, which is based on his research and direct experience in helping companies develop remote work strategies. Shane has a very impressive history in developing and implementing process improvement strategies for Fortune 100 companies and has played a vital role in boosting their productivity. Shane, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. Would you mind sharing a little bit more about your background and what you're up to at Virtira?
Sure. Thanks so much, Arnette. Pleasure to be here. So at Virtira, we use our decades of remote work experience to help companies sell better, grow faster, and be more productive in or out of the office. So I've been with Virtira about 3 years. And if you do your math, that lines up with the start of the pandemic. Prior to Virtira, I was one of these individuals who worked out of the office full time. I led a variety of media startups and software startups, with one of the biggest brands being Disney. So I ran one of the operations side of the studios, their studios in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. So in 2021, Cynthia and I started writing this book. We wanted to capture, some of our remote work best practices, and I'm happy to say it finally made it to Amazon's bestseller list last month, which is fantastic for us.
Oh, fabulous.
And now we're currently piloting a remote readiness assessment based on the book. So we go in, we have 200 questions broken apart into 10 different categories, which help identify how companies are doing with remote best practices and hybrid as well.
Yeah, correct. So, mentioning your book, I remember that there is a quote in there that you referenced Peter Drucker and, the management icon and, forward thinker and everything about leadership and management. And he noted back in 1993 that he felt, coming to the office was obsolete and that remote work was going to take over here soon. So give us some more insight into that and what's your perspective on where it's headed and where it's been?
Sure. Yeah. And I think we're starting to see some of his vision coming forward now with more and more people. Certainly the pandemic exposed people to the power of remote work and the potential for people to be productive outside the office. The founder of our company, Cynthia, the woman who I co-authored the book with, actually did her thesis, an MBA thesis on telecommuting in 1993. So it's been around for quite a while, and she's been working remotely on a hybrid basis since 1981. It was slowly gaining ground for many, many years. But of course, the advent of the internet really took off, and services like AOL and Yahoo were allowing people to collaborate by messages rather than email. And it was even endorsed by the U.S. government at one point as a way to reduce carbon emissions and keep people off the roads and whatnot. But then it hit a bit of a snag in 2013. I'm not sure if you remember Marissa Mayer from the CEO of Yahoo.
Wow.
She made a very public mandate to bring everyone back to the office, and a lot of other large companies followed suit. And it kind of went up to around 6% of the employees or the workers in the United States were having working remotely. And then of course the pandemic hit, and that it shot right up to about 54% of people working remotely. And it's been since slowing down and dropping to about 25% working fully remote. But the big thing these days is hybrid. People are now seeing that that it's possible to be productive outside of work. And now, there are fewer fully remote jobs, but there's over 70% of employees want either a hybrid or remote working options. And you see that in people are looking for changing jobs. You heard about the Great Resignation, these sorts of things. And this has now opened the doors to, a section of the workforce being remote or at least hybrid. But I also do want to point out that we talk about remote in terms of working from home quite a bit, but you can have a remote environment between offices. And we see this quite a bit with large Fortune 100 companies. The issue isn't whether people are working from home, it's whether they're interacting directly. And so we help businesses form better working relationships with their counterparts in other parts of the world. Time zones and other technology issues come into play at that point. But so if you started to look at people who are working remotely, most people are at this point.
Yeah. So, I think given the fact over the last couple of years, most everybody had to go to a remote work environment if they want to continue on. And so I think to various degrees, we've all seen different benefits that come from that. But what do you think are the greater benefits of remote working? But what are the drawbacks on that as well? So I know there's a positive and a negative. So why don't you share a little bit of your perspective?
Well, like anything, you're right, absolutely right. There's positive and negatives. But for starters, just wanting to point that it's not for everyone. And especially we're talking about working from home. Some people do very well working exclusively at home. Others do not. So it does offer flexibility. It offers cost savings for both the employees and employers. If you think about an employee standpoint, they're no longer commuting, they're no longer eating out, they're no longer buying clothes to match the decor of them at the office. The results are split, but most workers report higher productivity due to fewer distractions. And that's out of a survey from FlexJobs in 2020. We're continuing to look at this in terms of how do remote workers feel about working remotely? And this is where the hybrid has kind of come out of it. It's like, we want the best of both worlds. We do want to see people in person. There's value in meeting occasionally and collaborating together. But I just need to go home and focus on the work I need to do and not have, interruptions throughout the day. The other side of things from employers, of course, you have a much larger talent pool to pull from. You've got, even if they're limiting their search by country or time zone or even just region, you can still hire people in your region that are in your, that won't necessarily come into your office. So all things considered, what's happened is that certainly in the last few years, it's improved retention quite a bit. So companies are seeing a 25% increase in retention over previous years because of remote work.
Oh, that's phenomenal. I hadn't heard that statistic. That's great.
Yeah.
So for a company that is either considering remote culture or a company that's already engaged in remote workforce, what challenges or opportunities are there with recruitment and hiring? I know that's got to be a little bit of a challenge. And how do you approach that?
Well, for starters, we look for evidence of a strong social life outside the office. We want people who have interests outside of work, whether it be a club, a sports team, volunteering, whatever it might be. But people who have a passion outside of work generally do better. And this is where we start to change some of the perspectives of remote work. The reality of it is it allows people to have their social circles outside of the office. And that's changing culture quite a bit inside the office, because you no longer have to foster a social culture. You have to foster a relatable culture. So people need to be able to relate with each other and have a sense of trust that the person they're working with, has their best interest in mind, but they don't need to be friends. And so another thing we look for, another thing that's very common is introverts generally do better than extroverts, but that's not always the case. An introvert tends to be able to go long periods of time without talking to people directly. extroverts tend to get their energy from social settings. But we asked a lot of questions about how they manage their time, what their routine is, how they manage their work-life balance, how they stay motivated. And these answers tend to, earmark whether someone's, the right person to do remote work. And then once you hire them, you need to do a better job of measuring their productivity. So in other words, instead of measuring you measure their work, not the hours they work, or other means of measuring their productivity. So, yeah, and we saw in 2020, most employers were more or less. So most employees were more or less ready to work from home, but it was the leadership, management, and HR who weren't prepared. And so there's a lot of work to do at those levels first before you truly have a remote working company. And I can get into more of that detail as well as we go along here.
Yeah. So a company's gone through the recruiting and hiring stage. Now it comes to onboarding, and onboarding can be a very vulnerable step in this whole process. So what advice do you have for companies regarding onboarding?
Yeah. And honestly, it's very similar to what you give advice to someone who's being onboarded at a brick and mortar or in-office job. Start by visualizing the remote worker sitting at home alone, waiting, and be empathetic. This is somebody who's starting a new job, lots of things to learn. They don't know anybody. It's possibly scary. Maybe there's some anxiety around there. You just want to make sure you don't leave them with nothing to do. And so we advocate scheduling every minute of their first day and planning that out to make sure there's free time and breaks, and they have things to do, people to meet, and activities to work through. So we have about 100-step onboarding process we take our new hires through, and it includes everything from meeting with IT to get the setup to right straight through to a call with me to welcome them to the company. Unless you're unless you have thousands and thousands of employees, I think it's absolutely doable that the CEO meets with everybody who gets hired. It has such a lasting impact from the very get-go that it's worth the time for the CEO to book, half an hour with a new hire. Obviously, as you get to a certain size, it becomes a bit impossible. But if you up to that point, and most companies are. The other thing is we have a number of self-paced activities that reinforce who we are, what our company purpose and values are, and we have training programs we put them through to teach them the skills they need. So we don't take their remote working skills for granted. Remote work requires slightly different skills in communicating and facilitating meetings, and that aren't readily known by people who haven't been in the job before. And so we work them through those steps, and those self-paced activities give the people who are doing the hiring time to do their job, their day-to-day job while someone's being onboarded. So yeah, we teach them everything they need to know to communicate effectively, how to use their tools, how to look good online, how to make sure their workstation is more ergonomic, and so on and so forth. And then one of the key things we do is we pair them up with an onboarding buddy who they feel comfortable with asking all those questions of stuff we missed. I used to liken this back in the office days that, the onboarding buddy was there to tell you where to find the bathroom, because they don't teach you where the bathroom is in the office. And you spend your first day looking for that, the break room. Is this the right door you go into? That's what the onboarding buddy does. It's someone you feel comfortable asking where the bathroom is. And in remote world, there's similar questions like that people run up against, that you don't necessarily cover all the things during your planned onboarding process. Then we schedule an end of first week, end of first month, second month, and third month check-ins to make sure that they're staying on track. And then when it's all said and done, we ask them how we can improve. So we ask the new hire, hey, how did it go for you? What's one or two things we can do better next time? And everything all those 100 steps we have come from feedback from a new hire.
Oh, great. So let's shift the conversation to leadership and what skills are needed for leaders to, appropriately address that remote workforce. Because I do think there's some differences there, whether you're in office or out of office. So What insights can you give us there?
Well, we often say at Virtira, the remote work doesn't need different leadership. It just needs better leadership. Remote leaders need to establish trust by being consistent, transparent, and reliable. They need to empower their team members to create a supportive environment that encourages open communication. So in office, trust building is often facilitated through personal interactions and team building activities, whereas in the remote world, you might have fewer of those, but you empower trust through completing the work, doing the things you said you'd do, and following through. And we for truly remote companies, we encourage people to use icebreakers at start of meetings to give a few minutes of personal interaction to learn things about people. And so moving on to leaders also need excellent written and virtual communication skills, whereas in the office they need excellent verbal and nonverbal cues for communication. Remote leaders need to be adaptable and flexible. So since remote work can involve different time zones and work schedules and personal circumstances, they also need to have a higher emotional intelligence to be able to understand team members' emotions and needs, even without impersonal interaction. So remote leaders need to be more proficient in various digital tools and technologies, while in the office is still important, but they can get away with being less proficient.
Getting your team to be passionate about the work they do. When you're in office, I often, highly communicated the purpose of our company. Is that the same thing that you need to do with a remote team of, making sure you're cultivating the passion that you need for the engagement you're doing? What perspective do you have on that?
Oh, good question. And so I'm going to give you 3 words to remember. These are all come from the self-determination theory. And it is, in order to be motivated and passionate, remote leaders need to cultivate competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And this is a well-known psychological concept. So leaders need to give their remote workers autonomy over the tasks they do. And this is one of the big mistakes we saw a lot of companies making early on. A lot of keyboard checking, a lot of software to see if they're in their chair, leave the camera on all the time, measuring the hours they spend at their computer as opposed to whether they're actually being productive. So that doesn't mean letting them decide what they have to do, what their goals are. No, the leader's job is to identify the goal for the worker and help the remote worker determine how to get from point A to point B. This also doesn't mean that the remote worker sets their schedule. The manager is there to help them with that as well. It's a coaching model, and there's I also liken it to almost a Goldilocks approach. They need to you need to challenge them to pick a schedule that is slightly more challenging than just having all the time in the world for it, but not too much time that it's too easy, and not too little time that it's not enough time for it to get done. And this factors into the sense of competence. The manager must select tasks that stretch the remote worker's ability, but does not surpass them. And because the remote worker needs to feel capable, useful, and effective. And then finally, there's a relatedness part, which is very much more the culture side of things. They need to feel related to the company purpose, as you just mentioned. And that's one of the key bits with developing a remote culture is you encourage, you grow the company by adding people who believe in the direction the company's taking. And so if you don't have a clear purpose or mission, you can leave people behind. Back in the office days, you could get away with it. People had social circles that, and subcultures within their own departments, which brought them to the office. But those are less common now with remote work. And so they need, the remote worker needs to feel meaningful connections with those they work with, and including the manager.
So what do you think the best way to track the success of a remote program is? What can leadership is always looking for data and KPIs and metrics. What suggestions do you have for the HR teams out there that want to be able to deliver this information to their leadership?
Right. Well, there are some very clear metrics that HR teams can track. So, for example, turnover is a clear one. The more people you're losing, it surely indicates other issues. Sick day use, recruitment and onboarding success, and these are giving you fairly high level measurements of the health of the business. But we use a performance management tool that polls both the manager and the employee at performance time. And so we ask the employee if they feel valued and have everything they need to be successful. And from the management side, we ask, how engaged they feel the employees are, and how the manager would react if the employee got a job elsewhere. And so this can create some great metrics across the organization and by department to see, first of all, if what the manager is saying matches up with the team is saying, and then across the board, which department is performing better, and allows you to dive into deeper issues. We also periodically run what we call, I think you're familiar with the Net Promoter Score concept, right? And so this gives employees a simple question: out of 10, how likely would you refer our company to a friend for work opportunity, and give them just a paragraph of text for them to share any other feedback. And get a lot of great feedback on that, and it gives you some sources of data as well from based on qualitative data. Now, if your firm has an integrated tool for capturing tasks and action items, or good project management tool, there will certainly be data on how often dates are missed and how often the quality of the work that's being done from the team that's doing that work. And that I also feel that most managers have a pretty good sense of how their team members are performing, but I also caution them they should be careful not to get in the trap of feeling like someone's less productive because they don't see the evidence of their workers' productivity. I strongly recommend managers hold weekly one-on-ones with their team members and use a collaborative journal to capture discussion topics and notes, and then talk with a team member how they're doing on a regular basis. And that forms some of the best qualitative information.
Yeah. Oh, great. That's wonderful. So before we sign off here today, Shane, S2 Verify is a background screening company. And I have a question that I ask all of our guests, which is, if S2 Verify were to conduct a background screening on you, would we be discovering any surprises?
Maybe. If it was thorough enough, you might find out that I'm a seasoned harmonica player.
Oh,
and I've performed
okay.
on stage at a Disney team builder, so I can effectively say I'm a Disney cast member.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's fabulous.
It was not for public consumption. It was a team builder. So, but yeah, there you go.
So why don't you tell our audience where they can stay in touch with you and keep up to speed with the work you're doing in this area?
Yeah, we obviously, you can visit our website at Virtira.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I'm the only Shane Spraggs, so I'm pretty easy to find. And our book, as I mentioned, is available on Amazon and various bookstores. We have audio book as well as a Kindle version. So we're making a push to make the remote readiness assessment, to discover the benefits of it and how we can use it as a tool. So if anyone's interested in helping us with that pilot, by all means, reach out.
Great. That's wonderful. Well, Shane, thank you so much for joining. And for our audience, please tune in next week when we talk with Allison DePalio about benefits and making sure your employees have access to quality care. And it goes without saying, let's get America back to work, because dreams only work if we do. Shane, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
If you want to stay abreast of HR, recruiting, and hiring trends, tips, and tools, make sure you subscribe to America Back to Work. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating and a review.